But if you're the National Football League, okay, clearly it's not about talent anymore. It's about something else. And I'm going to tell you, I spent a large amount of the last 24 hours thinking about nothing more than I was thinking about collusion.
The $50 million robbery of Shedeur Sanders. Because that's what I just witnessed. Everywhere we've seen, everything we've seen, everybody that has seen him play said he is the one or two in this draft. I love Cleveland picking this.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Pick number 144, 5th round. That's where Shedeur Sanders heard his name called at the 2025 NFL Draft. Not in the first round, where every major analyst had him projected. Not in the second round, where even the skeptics assumed he'd land. The 5th round, after 32 teams passed on him. Not once, not twice, but 4 full rounds in a row. At his private draft party, the cameras captured everything. The silence, the stillness, the champagne that never got opened. And somewhere in that room, Deion Sanders, Hall of Famer, Coach Prime, one of the most recognizable figures in the history of professional football, was reportedly telling those closest to him that the league had just blacklisted his son. Now here's the question that's been burning through every sports broadcast, every podcast, every comment section since that night. Was this about talent? Was it about ego? Was it about politics? Or was it something far more calculated? A coordinated effort by NFL ownership to send a message that no player, no matter how talented, gets to challenge the league's authority? Because the more you pull on this thread, the more it unravels. And what's sitting underneath it all might just trigger one of the most significant legal battles the NFL has ever seen. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Shedeur was robbed, or did he bring this on himself? Keep watching, because by the end of this video, you're going to want to revisit your answer.
Looking at it as a convergence of a lot of history falling into one weekend. There's a history of the NFL and their ideas about protecting the shield and what they feel like. There's histories of the Sanders, history of the quarterback, which makes this really complicated, pretty much impossible to find one specific answer about why Sanders fell. He was probably already a fringe first-round pick, so some of the mock drafts were wrong. There's probably some owners out there who wanted to humble him and Sanders, and then there's just the talent that was there. So I'm not, it's okay, I think, to say we don't know what the specific answer is. What I do know, though, and I know it's maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like it's important to say, I want to say this to folks on the internet and folks who are paying attention. This is not the Colin Kaepernick situation. This is important to know. Colin Kaepernick was absolutely blackballed from the league for standing up for folks' rights. This is not what Shedeur Sanders went to. He was embarrassed for 48 hours in the draft, and he ended up going to a Browns team where he still could possibly be a starter on that team because they managed to have half of Wu-Tang Clan's worth of bad quarterbacks, and he can still work his way up to a starter. So this is not the same situation. His career can still end up being okay.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Before any of the chaos, before the lawsuits and the leaked tapes and the social media firestorms, there was just a kid from a football family who happened to be really, really good at the most important position in American sports. Shedeur Sanders grew up surrounded by greatness. His father, Deion Sanders, is one of the most decorated athletes in NFL history, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and the kind of personality that doesn't just enter a room, he consumes it. So when Shedeur started putting up numbers at the University of Colorado under his father's coaching, the spotlight wasn't just on him, it was a blinding white beam pointed directly at everything the Sanders name represented. And the numbers were real. This wasn't hype built on a famous last name. Shedeur led the entire NCAA in completion percentage, finishing at an astounding 74.1%. He broke multiple school records. He dissected defenses with the kind of precision that scouts spend years looking for. He was cool under pressure, accurate from the pocket, and operated with a level of football IQ that put him in conversations about the top quarterbacks in his class. For context, the #1 overall pick in that same draft had a lower completion percentage than Shedeur. Let that sink in for a second. Draft analysts, scouts, and football insiders had spent months building the case. The consensus was clear. Shedeur Sanders was a legitimate first-round talent. Some had him solidly in the top 10. Others projected a late first-round landing spot as the absolute floor. Even the more conservative evaluations had him going no later than early in the second round. The Colorado Buffaloes story was also impossible to ignore from a cultural standpoint. Deion Sanders had taken over a program that was struggling badly, completely rebuilt the roster, brought in his sons Shedeur and Shiloh, and turned the whole operation into must-watch television. College football hadn't seen anything quite like it in decades. The cameras followed them everywhere, the storylines wrote themselves, and at the center of all of it was Shedeur, performing when the lights were brightest, delivering when the expectations were highest. Everything pointed toward one outcome. Draft weekend would be the payoff, the moment where all that work, all that attention, all that production would be rewarded. Instead, it became something else entirely. And the sports world is still trying to make sense of what happened.
Because how in the hell does 32 teams in the National Football League pass on a quarterback that was universally recognized one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country entering this draft, and 32 teams passed on him? Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 different times they passed on him. How the hell does that happen? 4 rounds. It doesn't happen to a quarterback. We've never seen anything like this before. We've seen guys drop because of injuries. We've seen guys drop because of off-field issues, but we've never seen a quarterback projected to be a top 20 pick, universally recognized one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft, projected to be a first rounder, in all likelihood a safe bet of a late first rounder, and drop literally to the 5th round. We haven't seen anything like that.
The NFL draft is supposed to be one of the great celebrations in sports. For the players who've worked their entire lives for this moment, it's the official beginning of everything they've dreamed about. Families gather, cameras roll, names get called, futures get determined. For Shedeur Sanders, those 3 days turned into something closer to a slow-moving nightmare. Round 1 came and went. Shedeur didn't hear his name. That was surprising to most people, but not completely shocking. There had been whispers in the weeks leading up to the draft that his stock had slipped a little. Interviews hadn't gone perfectly. There were questions about fit. Analysts told themselves it was a deep class, a weird year, and that he'd be gone early in round 2 without question. Round 2 passed. Still nothing. Round 3. Round 4. Each pick that wasn't Shedeur Sanders added another layer of disbelief to what was unfolding. The analysts on the broadcast were visibly confused. Former players and coaches who appeared as guests couldn't fully explain it. The justification started feeling more and more strained with every hour that went by. And then pick number 144 arrived. The Cleveland Browns, in the 5th round, selected Shedeur Sanders. The cameras at his private draft party caught it all. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of a pause before celebration, the quiet of shock, of something going deeply wrong. The champagne stayed unopened. The people who had gathered to celebrate a milestone sat in stunned silence instead. It was one of those moments where you could feel the weight of it through a screen. 32 NFL teams had passed on this quarterback. 4 full rounds. 143 picks before his name was finally called. To put that in historical perspective, we have seen quarterbacks fall in the draft before. Injuries can cause a slide. Off-field issues can tank a prospect's value. Poor workouts, bad interviews, character concerns, all of these things have derailed careers before they started. But a quarterback who was universally recognized as a top 3 signal caller at his position, projected by nearly every credible analyst as a first-round selection, falling all the way to the 5th round with zero explanation? That had never happened. Not like this. Not even close. The drop from projected top 20 to pick 144 is a gap of more than 120 spots. In NFL draft terms, that's not a slide. That's a crater. And the people closest to Shedeur Sanders weren't about to let it go quietly. Deion Sanders has never been a man who struggled to find words. Throughout his playing career, his coaching career, and every chapter in between, he has always said exactly what he means and exactly what he feels. So when his son dropped to the 5th round of the NFL draft, the world didn't have to wait long to hear from him. Those close to the family said that on draft night, Deion told people around him that the league had just blacklisted his son, that this wasn't about talent, that something else was at play. And within hours, those private comments were making their way into public spaces. When Deion spoke publicly, he held nothing back. He posed the question that everyone was already thinking, but afraid to say out loud. How does a quarterback that every serious evaluator in the country identified as a top 3 player at his position get passed over by 32 teams 4 rounds in a row? How does that happen? Because in the entire history of the NFL draft, it simply hadn't. Not to a quarterback. Not under these circumstances. The emotional intensity of his reaction was impossible to dismiss as just a protective parent overreacting. He wasn't speaking from a place of entitlement. He was speaking from a place of genuine disbelief at something that had no logical explanation when viewed purely through the lens of football ability. And the sports world was paying attention. Not just fans, but analysts, former players, journalists, and legal minds who started connecting dots in ways that made the story much larger than one bad draft weekend. Colin Cowherd, one of the most prominent voices in sports media, made a comment that would end up taking on a life of its own. He described Shedeur as a celebrity backup quarterback, essentially arguing that the media attention, the famous father, and the personal brand were liabilities rather than assets for an NFL franchise. The comment spread everywhere. Fans pushed back hard. But what nobody knew at the time was that those words were allegedly already being flagged by people working closely with the Sanders legal team. According to sources, that specific phrase is now part of the early documentation being assembled for what could become a landmark lawsuit against the NFL. A quote from a sports pundit making it into legal filings is unusual, but this entire situation had moved well beyond the usual boundaries. The outrage was real, the confusion was genuine, and behind the scenes, something much more serious was already being set in motion. Here's where the story gets more complicated. Because while the collusion narrative was picking up momentum, there were also legitimate questions emerging about what actually happened during Shedeur's pre-draft process. And some of those answers were uncomfortable. At the NFL Scouting Combine, Shedeur Sanders made a decision that immediately raised eyebrows across the league. He declined to throw. He didn't work out in front of scouts and coaches the way virtually every other prospect does. For a quarterback whose entire value is tied to what he can do with a football in his hands, choosing not to demonstrate that in the most visible evaluation setting of the pre-draft process was a significant gamble. And by most accounts, it didn't pay off. But the combine decision was just the beginning. During the private team meetings, where front offices sit down with prospects to evaluate their football intelligence and coachability, things reportedly went sideways more than once for Shedeur. Teams commonly use these sessions to test a quarterback's ability to process information under pressure. One well-documented method is presenting a player with his worst film and asking him to break it down. Another is intentionally planting mistakes in an offensive install, errors hidden in the playbook that the quarterback is expected to catch, because identifying those kinds of mistakes is a core part of the quarterback's job. Shedeur reportedly struggled with both. When one team showed him difficult film and pressed him on it, the response was something close to, "Maybe I'm not the guy for you." That's not the kind of answer that builds confidence in a front office. When a coach called him out for missing a planted error in an install, the reaction again reportedly didn't land well. People who attended or were briefed on these sessions described Shedeur as someone who took the standard evaluation process as a personal challenge rather than a professional test. And in a league where a quarterback's ability to handle criticism, process corrections in real time, and stay composed under scrutiny is everything, that's a real problem. Now, does that explain a fifth-round selection? Not even remotely. Analysts who covered the story extensively said it plainly. If the combine and the interviews explained a slide, you're talking about dropping into the late second round, maybe early third in a worst-case scenario. You are not talking about 143 picks going by before your name is called. The gap between "he had some rough meetings" and "he fell further than any quarterback of his caliber in draft history" is enormous. And that gap is where all the real questions live. What started as frustrated tweets and emotional post-draft commentary began shifting into something with real legal weight within days of the draft. And the details that started surfacing were the kind that don't go away. According to reports, And it's important to frame this as what's been reported and alleged, not established fact. A private investigator working with Shedeur Sanders' legal team uncovered internal communications between NFL team ownership groups. These communications have not been made fully public and are still under review by independent news organizations, but the picture they allegedly paint is significant. The claim is that some NFL owners privately communicated concerns about what they described as Shedeur's branding baggage, essentially, the media attention that came with him and his father. More seriously, there are allegations that some ownership groups were quietly signaling to each other not to select Shedeur unless there was truly no other option available. If that's accurate, and again, this is alleged and unconfirmed, what it describes is textbook collusion, a coordinated effort among multiple independent franchises to artificially suppress a player's draft position, not based on talent evaluation, not based on on-field performance, based on internal politics, ego, and what one source described as hurt feelings over the way Deion Sanders had publicly operated during Super Bowl week, making clear that Shedeur would reject certain situations, similar to how Eli Manning handled his draft process years earlier. The difference is that when Eli Manning refused to play for the San Diego Chargers and engineered a trade to the Giants, the league essentially went along with it. When the Sanders family signaled they'd take a similar approach, the response reportedly came in the form of a coordinated silent treatment that lasted 4 rounds. There's also a specific moment that people close to the Sanders camp have pointed to as deeply suspicious. When Cleveland finally selected Shedeur at pick 144 in the 5th round, the cameras at the draft stage were already positioned as if they knew exactly where to be. The production crew appeared to have advanced knowledge. For people who've spent years on the draft stage, that level of pre-positioning for a 5th-round pick was described as unusual. And for some, it raised the question of whether Cleveland received some kind of guidance from elsewhere in the league about when and where to make the pick. None of this has been proven. But the accumulation of these details, the camera positioning, the alleged internal communications, the unprecedented nature of the drop, the timing, is exactly what Shedeur's legal team is reportedly building toward. And the lawsuit, if it moves forward, could seek damages in the tens of millions of dollars and force levels of NFL front office transparency that the league has never had to provide before. The NFL, for its part, has said nothing publicly. And sometimes, silence is the loudest answer of all. If the draft slide was the spark, what the New York Giants did next poured fuel on a fire that was already burning out of control. In the weeks following the draft, reports began circulating that footage existed from Shedeur Sanders' interview with the Giants. Leaks suggested the tape showed Shedeur responding poorly to the standard evaluation process, the kind of behavior that would explain why teams were passing on him. The Giants, rather than staying completely silent, made a curious decision. They released a carefully edited clip from the interview. And then they immediately locked everything else away, as if it were classified government material. The sports world reacted exactly the way you'd expect. If the tape is so damaging, release the whole thing. If it proves what you're claiming it proves, why are you only showing part of it? What exactly are you protecting? Those questions spread faster than the clip itself. Within hours, the Giants' partial disclosure had become bigger news than anything the clip actually showed. Social media lit up. Former players weighed in. Legal analysts pointed out that selectively releasing footage while withholding the rest of it creates its own set of problems. Fans weren't just skeptical, they were furious. The mechanics of what the Giants allegedly did during the interview are worth understanding. Teams routinely show quarterbacks their worst film. The interceptions, the missed reads, the plays that didn't work. It's a stress test. They also intentionally plant errors in offensive install packages to see if the quarterback catches them. It's a well-established evaluation tool. Shedeur reportedly didn't respond well in both situations, getting frustrated when challenged on a bad play, and failing to flag the planted mistake when a coach pressed him on it. But here's the thing. Every quarterback prospect goes through exactly this process. Every single one. The difference is that when other quarterbacks struggle with it, the footage doesn't get partially leaked to the media in what looks very much like a coordinated reputation management exercise. People close to the situation noted something else entirely. The Giants' GM had been caught on tape the previous year, the 2024 draft, asking his son for advice on who to pick. His son reportedly told him to go with Jaden Daniels, that tape got out. And yet somehow, the Giants found themselves in a position where they were trying to use a different tape to question someone else's professionalism. The irony was not lost on anyone. What the Giants intended as a narrative weapon ended up being one of the most counterproductive moves in recent sports PR history. Instead of making Shedeur look bad, they made themselves look calculating and petty. Instead of diminishing his story, they amplified it. Every time they refused to release the full tape, another wave of coverage followed. Every analyst who weighed in, whether they were sympathetic to Shedeur or not, had to address the Giants' handling of the situation. And every time that happened, Shedeur Sanders' name was at the center of the conversation. They tried to write him out of the story. They ended up making him the main character. While the lawsuits were being discussed, and the tape controversy raged on, and the sports media spent weeks dissecting every angle of what had happened, Shedeur Sanders quietly showed up to work. The Cleveland Browns had selected him in the 5th round. He was on a roster with Dillon Gabriel, Kenny Pickett, and a quarterback depth chart that, as one analyst memorably put it, had accumulated roughly half the salary cap worth of quarterback disappointment in recent years. The expectation from the outside was that Shedeur would sit at the bottom of that depth chart, get minimal reps, and spend his rookie season learning from a distance. That's not what happened. Early in training camp, during OTAs, and the initial practice windows, the reports coming out of Cleveland were mixed. Mary Kay Cabot, one of the most respected beat reporters covering the Browns, was largely skeptical. She reported that Shedeur wasn't taking team reps, wasn't getting the first or second team opportunities, and appeared to be operating as a 4th-string quarterback. She was direct about her read on the situation. In her assessment, Cleveland wasn't positioning Shedeur to compete for a starting role, not yet. Those reports generated significant pushback from fans and analysts who believed Shedeur deserved better. The debate about his status in Cleveland became its own separate conversation, layered on top of everything else already swirling around his name. And then the situation shifted. Cabot herself, the same reporter who had been skeptical, broke the news that changed the tone entirely. Shedeur Sanders had officially moved up to take first-team reps at training camp. He had done it ahead of Dillon Gabriel, which was not the expected order of things. And the reason, according to Cabot's own reporting, was straightforward. He earned it. Head coach Kevin Stefanski had seen enough to make the call. Shedeur had been working. He'd been processing the playbook, showing up every day, doing the things that quiet rooms and private practices reward even when the cameras aren't watching. The coaches noticed. The evaluation changed. And the quarterback who was supposedly buried in a 5th-round afterthought suddenly found himself getting first-team reps with one of the NFL's most quarterback-needy franchises. Other voices in the Cleveland media space pushed back hard on the idea that Shedeur had ever truly been buried. Kimberly A., another prominent voice covering the Browns, flatly rejected the notion that he was being overlooked. She said it was impossible to ignore his talent, his presence, and the way he commanded the field when given an opportunity. Her position was that anyone claiming Shedeur was being disregarded simply wasn't paying close enough attention. The redemption arc had officially begun. Not loudly, not with press conferences or public statements, just with reps and results and a coaching staff that changed its mind because the evidence in front of them demanded it. Step back from the draft position and the leaked tapes and the legal language for a moment. And what you're actually looking at is a story about power. The NFL is the most valuable sports league on the planet. Its franchises are worth billions of dollars. Its television deals dwarf every competitor. Its commissioner wields authority that very few organizations in any industry can match. And historically, the league has operated with a very clear understanding of who controls what. Players play, owners decide, GMs evaluate, coaches develop, and the league as a whole protects itself above everything else. What the Sanders family represented, knowingly or not, was a direct challenge to that dynamic. Deion Sanders is not someone who accepts the traditional power structure quietly. He never has been. His entire career, from the brash confidence of his playing days to the unapologetic boldness of his coaching approach at Colorado, has been built on operating by his own rules. When he made clear that Shedeur would have input into where he played, that certain teams weren't options, that the Sanders family intended to approach the draft the way Eli Manning's family had, the league apparently decided that wasn't acceptable. Eli Manning got to engineer his way to New York. The Giants embraced him and won 2 Super Bowls together. When the Sanders family tried to take a similar posture, the response, allegedly, was something far less gracious. Now, it's important to be careful here. There are analysts who make a reasonable case that collusion isn't the right word. One perspective that's been shared by multiple credible voices is that Shedeur was already on the fringe of the first round before any alleged coordination began, that some mock drafts overvalued him, that the combine decision and the interview performances created real hesitation, that the specific quarterback market in this draft, with Pittsburgh's situation at the position, Tennessee potentially acquiring Caleb Williams, and the Giants not viewing him as their answer, left him with fewer natural landing spots than the projection suggested. That argument has merit. The problem is that it still doesn't explain pick 144. Even the most conservative evaluation of his talent, accounting for every red flag and every rough interview and every questionable decision in the pre-draft process, doesn't produce a fifth-round result through normal market forces. Something else contributed to that outcome. The question is how much something else, and whether it crosses the legal line from teams making independent decisions into teams coordinating against a player. That question is now in the hands of investigators, lawyers, and eventually, potentially, a court. As for the Colin Kaepernick comparison that circulated heavily in the aftermath, the consensus among people who've examined both situations carefully is that they're different in meaningful ways. Kaepernick was shut out of the league entirely for years, with no team willing to give him a chance at any level after he took a public political stance. Shedeur ended up with a team, in a city with a franchise that desperately needs a quarterback, with a head coach who has now given him first-team reps and a legitimate path to starting. The situations share some DNA, but they're not the same. Shedeur's career is not over. It may be just beginning. And that's perhaps the most interesting part of this entire story. The people who allegedly tried to humble him, whether through draft positioning, selectively released interview footage, or coordinated silence, may have accidentally done the opposite. They took a quarterback with a famous father and a big personality and turned him into an underdog with a documented grievance and a legitimate case that the system treated him unfairly. And in sports, underdogs with stories like that tend to be extraordinarily motivated. Every snap Shedeur takes in Cleveland now carries extra weight. Every first-team rep, every practice performance, every preseason throw gets evaluated not just as football, but as evidence in an ongoing argument about what he deserves. The scrutiny that was supposed to suffocate him has become the fuel he's working with. The lawsuit, if it proceeds, will take time. Legal battles involving something as powerful and well-resourced as the NFL don't resolve quickly or simply, but the documentation is reportedly being assembled. The communications are allegedly in hand. The legal team is reportedly active. And the first move, establishing publicly that the Sanders family believes the process was corrupt, has already been made. The league hasn't commented. The teams involved haven't commented. And in the middle of all of it, a fifth-round quarterback is quietly taking first-team reps in Cleveland, working his way towards something that nobody, not the owners who allegedly coordinated against him, not the analysts who dismissed him, not the reporters who called him a fourth-stringer, can fully predict yet. That's the thing about stories like this. They don't end where people expect them to. The NFL tried to write Shedeur Sanders' story for him. Pick 144, fifth round. Footnote: he's writing something different. And the whole world is watching. So here's where everything stands. A quarterback, projected by nearly every credible voice in football, to go in the first two rounds, fell all the way to pick 144. His father publicly accused the league of blacklisting his son. A private investigator reportedly uncovered internal communications suggesting team owners coordinated against the pick. The New York Giants released a partial interview tape that created more questions than it answered. And Cleveland, the team that took the fifth-round flyer on him, has now given him first-team reps and a real shot at the starting position. The lawsuit is reportedly coming. The NFL has said nothing. And Shedeur Sanders is practicing. What makes this story so difficult to resolve neatly is that the truth probably lives somewhere in the middle of all the competing narratives. There were real red flags in his pre-draft process. And there was also almost certainly something beyond normal market forces that pushed him as far as he fell. Both things can be true simultaneously. That middle ground is exactly where the legal battle will be fought. But here's the thought to take away from all of this. The NFL has survived enormous controversies. It survived labor disputes, player safety scandals, anthem protests, and years of public relations crises. It always has, because the product, the actual game, is too compelling to walk away from. But every now and then, a story emerges that forces the league to confront something it would rather keep hidden. Something about how decisions actually get made. Something about who really has power and who only thinks they do. Shedeur Sanders might be the quarterback who forces that conversation. Not because he intended to, not because he planned any of this, but because the gap between where he was supposed to land and where he actually landed is too large, too visible, and too documented to disappear quietly. Whether he becomes a starting NFL quarterback or not, that question is going to linger over the league for a very long time. And the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is going to say something important about what the NFL actually values versus what it claims to. Now tell me, do you think Shedeur earns that starting spot in Cleveland? And do you believe the NFL's hands are clean in how this draft unfolded? Drop your answer below. Because based on everything in this video, I genuinely want to know where you land on this one.
If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.